Mas você...
Entrou.
Boa tarde, pessoal. Sejam muito bem-vindos ao Cenas do Palco Ato 2. Esse evento que iniciou ano passado pretende ser anual. Estamos contentes porque muitos que participaram ano passado continuam com a gente esse ano. E quero agradecer mais uma vez a professora Rosa Vallejos, que aceitou fazer essa conferência de abertura com a gente. Já adianto que, ao final, depois de mais ou menos uns minutos de intervalo, nós teremos a nossa terceira atividade do dia, que é uma mesa redonda com o professor Saulo César da USP, a professora Lene Bertocchi, da UFMT, e a professora Ariadne Domingues, da UFBA. Mais detalhes, o resumo das palestras, vocês encontram no site do evento. Então, sejam muito bem-vindos, que todos tenham excelentes discussões. Passo a palavra agora rapidinho para o professor Leosmar.
Então, estou com a Claudete nesse trabalho, né, com o grupo Palco, aí, movimentando pesquisas e eventos, estudos, né, em linguística cognitiva. Desejo a todos um ótimo evento, uma ótima palestra, e seja bem-vinda, professora, né, palestrante, e é isso, né? Boa tarde para todos e bons trabalhos.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Amanda e hoje eu vou ajudar na tradução da palestra da professora. Eu sou mestranda da Universidade Federal de Goiás e estou participando da organização desse evento. Obrigada. All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, sou a Ana Flávia, sou aluna da UFRN, vou estar fazendo aqui a mediação da nossa palestra, e aí, né, para não me prolongar, vou começar apresentando a nossa convidada, presenting our guest. So, Professor Rosa Vallejos, she is a professor of linguistics at the University of New Mexico. Her research is centered in Amazonian, one of the most diverse areas of the world, as we are almost aware of, I think so, right? She has been working on several projects to study 3 typologically distinct languages, Cucama, Sequoia, and Amazonian Spanish, and her interests and research focus are in morphosyntax, language contact, and documentary fieldwork. And she is not only my US advisor, but my amazing morphosyntax teacher. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome. And it's with you, Professor. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Ana Flavia, for the invitation and to the group of people, researchers hosting me today. I am honored for the invitation, and I'm always happy to share my work. And so let's see. I have prepared for you a talk specifically on the linguistic expressions of space to reflect on which types of conceptualizations are embedded in these different constructions available in 2 languages. Today, I'm going to give you examples of Cucama and Sequoia from my own fieldwork. Okay, so let's start with a couple of key ideas from theory to understand a little bit what I'm going to say. I'm sure you are familiar with these ideas, but just to make sure that you understand how I'm going to be using these terms today. Okay. And so, a basic introduction to location and the basic locative construction is in this slide. To understand static location, we need to pay attention to 2 elements, right, of a locative scene, which is the figure, whatever is being located, and the ground, right, where the figure is located. And the figure would be something movable, and the ground something more stable, where the figure is located, right? And the idea of the basic locative construction is that every language will have a default construction to respond to a question like, where is X located? X being the figure, right? So in a given language, we should be able to identify which is the basic locative construction, right? And in theory, this construction would correspond to the more entrenched construal type in the speaker's mind. So from typology, what we know is that there are at least 4 types of languages based on the basic locative, this idea of the basic locative construction. So the type 0, according to this American Levinson's typology, is that there will be languages in which you will have the expression, the locative construction will have 0 predicate forms, 0 verbs in particular. Okay, and there's a type 1 language in which you will have the basic locative construction will have 1 predicative element that will be identified as the copula, right? Has little features of a typical verb, but operates as the linker between the figure and the ground. In type 2 languages, we will have a small set of verbs that will operate in the locative basic locative construction, right? Around 3 to 7 verbs. And in type 3 languages, you will have a large set of possible verbs that can operate in this construction, locative construction, right? Languages of Mesoamerica are very famous for being in type 3 languages, saying that some languages, some researchers say that having between 80 and 100 verbs that can operate as locative predicates, right? So one of the questions that guided my research in the languages I study, locative constructions, is whether we can identify, how easy can we identify a basic locative construction, and basically in which type of this, in which of these categories can this language be located, right? So, and then a very quick mention to what will guide the discussion in the following slides will be the idea of construal. The fact that we can frame semantic content in different ways, right? Some aspects of a scene will be elaborated, while some others will be relegated to the background. We are not always paying attention to every detail, right? Some details are salient, we highlight and we express that by linguistic means. And some distinctions that are generally expressed in locational constructions will be, for example, how speakers abstract away the figures on the ground, right? The schematization, whether it's with a complex geometry or whether they are perceived as more point-like entities out there in our experience. And also the other parameter important is the shape of the figure, whether we are dealing with an elongated thing like a bottle or more like a round thing like a ball, that matters. And the same thing for the ground, whether we are seeing the ground, perceiving the ground as something flat, as something like a container, that matters. And the other important parameter is the posture of the figure. This is a projection of the human body. When we see a bottle on a table, we are projecting how the posture of a human being, and we may identify some elements in the figure being located as projecting from the human body, right? And the disposition of the figure, which means the relationship between the figure and the ground, the precise relationship, right? Whether it's laying down, across, hooked, and all of that. And another important concept here is the active zone. So when we see a bottle on a table, the active zone will be the base of the table that we associate, for example, with the feet of a human body. A human body standing, the active zone will be whatever is in contact with the ground. And that would be the base in the case of a bottle, right? And that is also important for how we perceive or construe the location of figures. And the last point, I think, in my intro slides is this idea of conceptual alternativity, that whatever we observe in the world can be presented, described in different ways, can be construed in different ways, right? And in that context, whatever we think as basic would be whatever is entrenched in the speaker's mind, right? And one question that accompanies my research is whether we can identify one construct as the basic, and only one construct should be the basic. In other words, can multiple constructs be considered basic, right? How can we discover this? How can we answer this question? That is more or less what I've been trying to do with my online research. So let me introduce first some information from about static location in COCAMA. Static location is how figures are located, because dynamic location will be figures moving around, which is motion events, right? I'm going to present today only static location, and this has been published in a couple of works in 2010 and 2016, which is the grammar that I produced. And this is one of my collaborators, Victor Machota, Shaman. In the type of line of work that I do, since I work with minority groups, minority languages, we always give full credit to our collaborators. We identify them, we name them. That's a tradition, right? Because they are collaborators, they're not like subjects that we run experiments with. And so with them, I didn't do experiments, and I will explain why. COCAMA is spoken in this region of Peru. This map represents linguistic families, and the colorful area is the Amazon of Peru. The population of COCAMAs is around 20,000. It's an estimation. And they live in around 150 villages, meaning their communities are spread in a larger territory. Their speakers are calculated in 1,500, and according to the last census, official census 2017, around 1,200 people declared to have learned to speak in COCAMA, meaning COCAMA is their first language, which of course doesn't mean that this is people that still speak COCAMA nowadays, right? Most of the speakers that I work with are elders, around 60 years old. This is an endangered language only spoken by elders today. And so I've done fieldwork through the years, since '97, in fact, but since 2006, I've done more structured documentary work, meaning more. There's certain methodologies that we follow. I can explain that if necessary. And because I've worked with elders, it is difficult to run any type of more structured elicitation, more experiment-like type of work, right? Because of the type of speakers that we're working with. And again, this is about fieldwork methodologies that I can discuss in detail later. A couple of features that are relevant for linguists that are always wondering what's the typological profile of a language. Perhaps one thing to notice about COCAMA singularities is that SVO is the default most common pattern in terms of word order, but that happens mainly when you have unmarked clause for tense and aspect, or marked for tense. But if the clause is marked by aspect, SOB is the order. It switches in word order. And then there's a pervasive presence of clitics as opposed to suffixes. So the meaning in terms of grammaticalization processes, these are young morphemes. So for example, for markers of mode, will have second position clitics, and for tense we'll have verb phrase clitics, and for number we have noun phrase clitics. So these are not suffixes of noun, suffixes of verbs, or anything like that. Okay, those are clitics. The scope is larger than the word. And another interesting feature of COCAMA is gender length. So several domains in the grammar for which you will have different forms depending on the gender of the speaker, whether it's a female speaking or a male speaking. You will have different markers. For instance, plural markers will be different, demonstratives will be different, pronouns will be different, and so on and so forth. So let me just introduce a couple of ideas about location in COCAMA. For doing this work, I was already in the field. I didn't at the time, I was not familiar with many stimulus sets. So I quickly understood that to elicit the location of entities, I would need some sort of material to be able to compare the responses among speakers. And also at that time, the only response that I have for location was, okay, I will introduce my collaborators. This data was specific about location, was collected with these two elders, Rosa Vallejos-Yopán, which is the speaker of the COCAMA variety, and Victor Yuri Machota, who's a speaker of the Cucamire variety. This language has two varieties in Peru, and that is why the language as a whole is known as COCAMA Cucamire, right? But I will refer as COCAMA as a short use. So I'm going to introduce some of the data. So the pattern that I was familiar with was this one, right? The basic juxtaposition of figure and ground with a general postposition, locative general ka. So to say like the hammock is in the house, the basket is in the house. So that was the easy, quick response. However, when I started to using more structural elicitation, like for instance, this drawing that I draw, you can tell that it's very childish. I draw it on the fly very quickly, but it worked. And so then several other possibilities started to emerge. For example, this is another possibility to locate figures in this picture, in this drawing. Like, for instance, the chicken is underneath the floor, the hawk is above the house, the snake is above the house. And this was important to, for example, make sure that entities that are located, for example, like the snake on the floor, no, this is the house. The roof of the house are, in touch, the figure with the ground is the same. You can use the same expression that when the figure is above the roof without touching it, right? There's a certain distance. It's perceived, can be construed the same way. These kinds of things are possible when you use this type of stimulus in fieldwork settings, like the one I work with. And this construction now involves, it's no longer a juxtaposition alone. This set of forms like underneath, above, behind, operate as sort of stative verbs. And another possibility is this. Here what you have is a further, more elaborated description. And you have the dog is by the side of the tree, the canoe is by the edge of the river, the dog is by the trunk of the tree. This is a set that the elements in blue here are nouns. Technically are nouns, right? But what we call relational nouns that can predicate the location of figures if they are marked here by postpositions. These are general postpositions again, which is different than the one above. This is a different construction than the one above. And finally, here's another one. Just I'm making this simple. And what we have here is a full elaboration of the figure. Now we're saying here the hammock is tied inside the house. For here, what we're using is posture verbs, right? Tiquita would be the being tied of something. Wa is a sort of gerund. And then you have again source of the stative verbs. So this is another description of the locative scene, but with further elaboration of other elements. Here we're paying attention to the shape of the figure, the disposition of the figure, and the specificities of the ground. So the point that I want to make here, even in COCAMA, even if I didn't run experiments, we can see that they can construe locative scenes in multiple ways and can pay attention to multiple details. So what we can conclude for COCAMA? That there is, in fact, as simple as most frequent construction, which is the juxtaposition of figure and ground, plus the ground being marked by the locative postposition. However, responses to visual stimuli reveal that COCAMA has many other alternatives to construe locative scenes, right? That involves stative verbs, relational nouns, position verbs, and so on and so forth. What I cannot tell is what would be the results of an experiment, because I didn't. run an experiment with them. This is just a first pass, and this is something, again, the question is, are experiments even relevant in this particular context? Maybe not, because of the population, the type of speakers that we're dealing with. So with that as an introduction, now I will move to Sequoia, where I did run some experiments, right? With whom I ran some experiments. So this is another collaborator of mine, Severino Cabrera. And the results of this research, some of them can be found in this publication of mine in collaboration with a student here, and Hunter Brown, who's a PhD student now, somewhere else. And so the sequoias, where do they live? They live in the borders between Peru and Colombia, here in the Putumayo River. And the total population is estimated in that 1,000. 7% of them live in Peru, and the rest live in Ecuador, in this region, more or less. And according to the last census, around 650 declared to have learned to speak Sequoia's first language, meaning the entire population still has Sequoia's L1, meaning basically it's spoken by all generations. So you can work with all ages of the consultant. Right? The language is still strong, but there's growing Spanish Sequoia bilingualism. This bilingualism is growing very quickly. And so I've conducted fieldwork with them over the years, also since 2005, all these years, these visits to this region. This is the area close to the Putumayo River. There's one community here. This is in the Peruvian side. This is a recent migration, and the Ecuadorian communities are located around this region. But these two varieties are very different. Well, different, not very, but different. To some extent, mainly in the phonetics and phonology and some grammatical aspects as well. And here they live very close to the Sionas, which is another Tucano group. And the language has undergone dialect leveling, as far as I understand. Okay, meaning there's been some changes in the language, in which, as a result, Siona and Sequoia in that region are more or less like a dialect continuum at this point. Some of the features of Sequoia that may be relevant: this is a head final language predominantly. There's some flexibility in ordering. This is a head and dependent marking, so you have marking of subject and subject in the verb, but also case marking. But the language has differential case marking, meaning the nominative accusative marking can show up only when necessary, when pragmatically necessary, right? It's completely pragmatically driven. And then you have direct and indirect evidence, meaning this has evidential marking. The language has switch reference system. It has everything that you may dream of as a linguist documenting languages, and nominal classifiers and several multi-verb constructions, complex predicate constructions. So, and of course, for today, I'm going to present only the results of a study that I did with this particular stimulus set. And this was done with the picture series for postural verbs stimuli designed by colleagues at Max Planck in Nijmegen. And the series has 78 pictures, but they recommend adding pictures from the communities themselves, right, to ground the pictures in the local context for ecological validity. And I work with 6 speakers for this particular study, and they responded to they described these pictures, right? So the speakers that I've worked with are the 6: Nelly Vilches, Roman Chota, Edith Chota, Marcela Cabrera, Gregorio Vázquez, and Marita Cabrera. And in the villages, right? The picture series, this is how they look like. I don't know if you have seen them. They are freely available online. You can access them and the protocol to employ in fieldwork. And what they did is design these pictures to control for figures. For example, you have round-shaped figures like balls, or small like beans, and you have for number. You have one ball and multiple balls. I don't have a picture picture with multiple balls, and you control foreground. You have tables, figure, ball on a table, ball on the ground, and so on and so forth. You have manioc on a track, 1 manioc, 3 maniocs. You have manioc on the ground. You have bottles on the ground. You have bottles in the basket. So it's a nice stimuli, very controlled. But also you have things like this. You have rope that here it's supposed to be grounded on a rock, right? Rope on a rock. And that some of them became very interesting for this context. So I want to explain. Some pictures work extremely well, some others not so much. And I wanna just mention that fact here. The photos that I've supplemented the set with are, some of them are here, and as I mentioned, there's 20. For example, this is a crown used by elders, males, men, and they're usually kept on sticks on the house towards the roof, and these are pots, right, on the trees, in the branch of trees, hang to dry. This is a grinder, right, for manioc, and you have clothes hanging to dry. You have cassava bread hanging to dry. You have here this plate of ceramic on fire. And I added this mainly because of, in the protocol for this data set, there was a suggestion to include fire as ground and water as ground, because in the design they didn't manage to do that. So I said, okay, I have pictures, so I got creative and I included figures on ground and figures on fire and on water. So here's an example. Let's see if I can play this example for you. I'm not sure if I will manage to, so that you can hear how this sound. Okay, let's see. I don't know if you heard something like me once more, so that you can feel it. Okay, so that is how this speaker is describing this ball on the ground. And for this description, what is important here is in red. It says the ball is lying on the ground to say the ball is on the ground, right? And so it's using a posture verb to describe the position of the ball. Okay, that's enough. I'm trying to move. Okay. How can I move here? Okay. This next picture has a bottle on the ground, and this is a little bit of the base is grounded. It's inside the ground a little bit, right? So this, for example, was construed in 2 ways. The bottle is standing on the ground, which is expected for a bottle, right? It has in vertical elongation, and the bottle is sitting on the ground. This was only possible because there was a little piece was inside. Right? So I won't play for you because I think you got the point. And I will mention quickly a couple of odd pictures, which is important for us field workers. What went wrong? What it tells? And when you're looking for a conceptual representation of scene, it's important to pay attention to what the speakers may be looking at. For example, these types of pictures, right? They are to some extent comparable. Here you see a ceramic pot, right, of clay, placed very far up in a branch, and the speakers all were kind of obsessed with the resultative meaning, the resultative construction, meaning that somebody may have put that there in purpose, because you don't locate ceramic pots in branches. Those are precious things, delicate things. They will break if you play around. Only maybe kids can do that. However, you see that when you have these types of scenes, they would elaborate. The responses won't be simple, like the ceramic is on the branch. That's not. None of them construed these scenes in that way. They had to elaborate. A pot is neatly located upside down on a small branch of the tree, and some even added more details, like maybe someone was playing with it, because it's pragmatically odd, right? This one was pragmatically odd because of rocks are not known in the region. We don't have rocks in the lower lands. of this type of rock in particular. Beans. This was not necessarily easy to elicit because this type of beans don't exist. But not only that, it's pragmatically odd because you won't find beans on the floor. Beans are not on the floor unless somebody fell down and dropped them, right? Or kids were playing, which is not allowed. This is food. And so I ended up excluding 6 features in total because none of them elicited locative descriptions. Why would that be? Those are the questions that I'm more interested in. Okay, I'm already accounted for when they describe locative scenes, but why in this case? You see, this one you have here, what I was expecting is Yoko is sitting on the pot. This is the Yoko drink. It's a very special drink out of veins in the Sequoia territory. And it's in the pot. This was good. It worked. But however, this one, the cassava bread is lying on the grill I was expecting or I was looking for. And nobody said this. Everybody said, a woman is making cassava bread. At some point, I thought that maybe it's because I left just a little hand of the lady right here, and that immediately takes the speakers to the human being in the scene because of the animus hierarchy, right? Being dominant here. But that didn't happen with the hand of the speaker. So what it matters here the most, it seems to be that this is construed as a dynamic scene, something going on, happening, as opposed to something static being located. So the cassava making is more salient here. And the other thing here, I don't know if you can guess at this point which one worked well and which one didn't work well. The description that I was expecting are this: the cassava bread is on the rock, the clothes are in the rock. None of this, the cassava bread was not a response, right? Everybody said the cassava bread is hanging to dry, and the clothes are hanging in the rope. That was good. My hypothesis at this point that I need to test is that because the clothes can be hung in several places, there's multiple alternatives. So specifying the ground, the rope as a ground, is interesting, is informative, tells you something about where you can find the clothes. But in the cassava bread, it's less likely because there's generally a designated rope to dry cassava bread. So if in a response, if you just say the cassava bread is hanging to dry, whoever wants to locate the cassava bread will be able to find it because there's a designated place. So that's my hypothesis that needs to be tested. I don't know. How about this? So I said, okay, I can do this with kids too, right? Why not locate human beings? But the stimulus set is for inanimate entities. So I wanted to see if the same predicate that it's can be used in these scenes too. So here you have the girl is lying on the ground. The girls are lying on the ground. That's what you would expect, right? I was expecting that. Well, none of those work. So they say the girl is lying while writing on the piece of paper. What is being predicated, that is the writing, the dynamic, the event of writing. The same, either when it's one girl, two girls, whatever, it doesn't matter. All of them didn't predicate location with these scenes, with these pictures. Again, what it's interesting for me more as a fieldwork is, okay, what do I need to change? What is happening here? What can I modify here to obtain different results? Okay, the last thing, just for fun, and I think I'm running out of time. I have to run through the last pieces. Here, none of them said the plane is on the river, on the water. I was expecting that because I wanted to see water at ground. Well, everybody said the plane is coming or leaving. And because I didn't pay attention, they are so detail-oriented. And they told me afterwards when I said, why is not the plane is on the water? Because there's a little movement in the water. So that's enough to build this as a dynamic scene, right? Okay, enough with the pictures, and let's see. Okay, I just want to leave you with this, in case there's some field workers here in the watching this presentation. And I'm leaving you with these questions. Is cultural neutrality compatible with natural usage? Let's keep that in mind when we design our stimulus sets. What counts as typical or atypical in the domain of location? What is typical and atypical? I couldn't find the answer for this. And when we published this work, one of the reviewers says, describe more what is atypical. And we couldn't find any reference in the literature on cognitive linguistics and conceptual representations. What would be typical or atypical in the domain of location? In case you know some references, let me know. And what are the risks of adding cultural specific stimuli? the benefits I know, the benefits we kind of know, but the risks and how can we incorporate those in our when we are entertaining research questions. That's important. So here I'm just going to go through the results a little quicker so that we don't run out of time. The verbs that we collected with the stimuli were a large set of verbs that we organized mainly using the literature that we know in 3 categories: topological verbs, be on, be in. They elaborate on the surface, in particular, the ground. Postural verbs that focus on the figure. We have be standing, be sitting, be lying, be hanging. And dispositional verbs, a bunch of dispositional verbs that elaborate on the relationship between the figure and the ground. And here are some examples of the responses that we got with topological verb. For example, we have the stick is on top of the table. That will be a straight topological verb construction. And the rope is in the basket. So these are postural verbs. Example with postural verbs, we have the bottle is standing on the rock. The ball is lying on the ground. Those are how the responses look like with the postural verbs. This is the response with the existential verb pa'i that says something like on the rock is the squished rope. So I have 2 possible analyses for this. One would be what the Nicresel says. This is the construction that you use to predicate of a scene starting from the ground and not from the default figure. So when you talk about pot, or let's say a cup, and it's on the table, and you usually start from the figure. The figure is on the table. But there are scenes in which you start from the ground. Potentially you could have something like on the table, there's a cup. This is what's going on here. When you start from the ground and you predicate the existence of a figure in that ground, right? So that's one potential analysis. And the other potential analysis is that this is a presentational location construction in which you present an entity in a place. Like there is a cup on the table, right? This is another operation in terms of predication. And the last construction that we elicited was the copula construction. There's a copula here, this is a suffix copula. And with this copula, you elaborate on the disposition of the figure in respect to the ground. This is where all this large set of dispositional verbs, like going down, across, and all of that, show up, right? This is used mostly to talk about these complex scenes, right? Or pragmatically odd complex scenes, like oh my God, the ceramic pot on the branch of the tree, okay? So the questions that we answer in this particular article is, can a single language have multiple preferred conceptualization types from which speakers can draw to profile different aspects of a locative scene? The short response is yes. That's where our analysis. And how does a language like Sequoia fit within current typologies of location, right? We say our response is, it's not easy to tell. We cannot tell that this is the basic locative construction. One of them is a little bit more frequent than the others, but when we apply all the tests and the suggestions, it's difficult to answer this is the basic locative construction, okay? So these are like, we quantify some of the results. We have 470 descriptions that were entered into this analysis after all these exclusions. And you can see that the topological verbs, be in and be on, are a large chunk, half of the responses, be on being the most frequent one, meaning this is the more abstract schematic response at this point. But you have postural verbs also, a large portion of them, right? And when you do a close-up on this, zoom in, line would be a large portion. That these results may be a result of the stimulus set. Maybe there are more scenes about line than sitting, for example, okay? Or the figures themselves. Could be a result of the design of the stimulus. And another thing that I want to mention here is the fact that we have a lot of variation across speakers, okay? And only 6 pictures were described with one single verb, like beyond. Only 6 pictures out of this 80 something, right? 86 pictures in total. Only 6 elicited similar responses across speakers. That means there's a huge range of variation, meaning speakers are free to elaborate, construe these scenes in different ways. Okay, have the means, have the linguistic means, the linguistic strategies available to them to build, to present the locative scenes in multiple ways, right? And another telling point is that the copula construction, the one that occurs with this large set of positional verbs, it's a large number of them, 25, meaning 25 are unique descriptions of these pictures. They're not much, they're unique responses. And then I will just provide some results in these figures to just once again make the point that, for example, you organize the responses according to verbs by figure, meaning these are the figures located, and these are the verbs, the types of verbs elicited. None of them has a strict association, a correlation. There's not like a verb is associated with a particular figure. So basically, all the constructions can occur with different figures. A good response is to elaborate for different figures. The same goes with ground. There's not a close association of particular verb with specific grounds. Perhaps there is some here. Be in with containers, like a basket, for example. Okay, that is expected. Or the pot with the drink. Right, so that is be in elaborates on the ground itself, being a container. But besides that, any other verb is good for any other type of ground. Here, all the grounds, baskets and tables and trucks and stones and ground and all of that. But verb by relation type, again, these are all the relation types, right, that are expressed by multiple disposition verbs. They can show up with all kinds of verbs as well. So there's not a way to tell these particular verbs are good for specific relation types, right? You can predicate about different relation types with these different construction types as well. Okay? There's not a one-on-one mapping. So then there's additional criteria suggested to get to what is basic. Right? What is more entrenched? The additional suggestions are that the topological, whatever is more basic should be used by speakers to account for atypical scenes, complex scenes. In this data set, in the Sequoia case, what it's used for atypical scenes is the copula construction. Neither topological verbs, not postural verbs. The copula construction is the one used for complex atypical scenes. That points in a different direction, right? To be like, from this criteria, whatever is basic in Sequoia would be the copula construction, which doesn't match the results, like the quantitative results, right? And another criteria is the questions that are employed to elicit location. Which of these predicates is used to question the location of figures, right? For instance, where is the butter? Which construction do I use? Do I use the existential? Do I use the topological construction? Do I use postural verbs? Well, all of them. In Sequoia, you can question the location of figures using any of those. All of those are good, but they point to different, they have different implicatures, which is important. And I can explain that a little bit later if necessary. Negation is another criteria suggested in the literature, right? Whatever is used to negate the location of a figure, that points to the basic locative construction. Again, in Sequoia, you can negate with all of those. You can negate with postural verbs, as in A, right? The ball is not on the table. You have the postural verbs to be on, plus the negative marker ma. You can negate with postural verbs, standing. And here, this one too is the topological verb, be on. Stand is the postural verb, right? Nika, with the negation particle. And you can negate with the existential as well, which is because we have a dedicated negative existential. There is not, doesn't exist. A specific marker. So you can negate in multiple ways. Again, none of those point to a specific, basic, more entrenched locative construct. Okay? This is a summary of what each of the typical constructions documented points to, elaborates about, right? So in the topological verbs with the beyond verb, whatever is the profiled piece is the surface. It's about ground geometry, is the surface conceived more as somehow flat bar, more abstract, could be a little, not strictly flat. It's just surface. That is at this point the conclusion. B elaborates in the ground geometry, being as a container, right? As we saw, right? It's used mostly with baskets and cups and things like that. For postural verbs, what we have is they elaborate in the figure disposition. For example, standing will be used for vertical elongated figures. Lying would be for horizontal elongated figures. Hanging is another very frequent postural verb in the Amazon at large. I don't know if you are aware of this. In languages of the world in general, there are 3 postural verbs that are quite common: standing, hanging, and sitting. In the Amazon, our 4th verb is adding, which is hanging. And it's not because people are hanging themselves or something like that, but the idea is that because we use hammocks in the region very often. Hammock is a natural disposition of figures to rest. And so hanging is for suspended from ground, but very elongated, right? Or vertically elongated. And sitting, not elongated base, right? That's how the conclusion would be, what is the profiled piece of the figure? And for copula, what is profiled is the relationship between the figure and the ground. And for the presentational location, the presence of the figure in the ground. There is a cup on the table. That's what it's being profiled. Okay. So which one is the BLC? For Sequoia, we cannot base the response on frequency alone. And beyond is it's frequent, right? 45%, but is frequency enough? According to the literature and the typology, that's not enough. You have to consider additional criteria, right? So the additional criteria suggested by American Levison, like questions and negative polarity, the result make the results less clear because they point in different directions. And our conclusion is that the distribution of responses across figures, grounds, relations, and also the variability of responses across speakers make us conclude that there's not a default construction, but rather speakers choose a construction based on the part of the scene they wish to highlight. Okay, so they have this alternativity. So the Sequoia displays 4 constructions to predicate location, each profiling a specific aspect of a locative scene. Speakers do not necessarily default to one basic construction, and there's little reason to imagine that Sequoia is unique in having multiple preferred locative construction types. And I want to leave you with this idea that perhaps the basic locative construction may not reflect the construction's basicness as much as previously thought. Okay, maybe what we have in several languages are in fact this conceptual alternativity at work. And for instance, a quick look at some of the Amazonian languages that have been documented that have multiple locative construction types. We see this, right, across language families. For Sikwani, 4 postural verbs, several less grammaticalized postural verbs, and Trumai, we have 1 copula, 6 postural verbs, and so on and so forth. Meaning that if we would run some experiments of more like a stimulant-based elicitation tasks, maybe we would arrive to the same similar results that we found in Sequoia, saying that speakers can construct locative scenes in multiple ways. And that is all that I have for you today. Thank you.
Oh, that was perfect. Congrats, Prof. That was awesome. Now, I think we have time just for one question or two. I'm not quite sure. But before, while I'm just taking a look because I know we have to go to another thing. When you talked about the hanging example, can we say that that's why we need to have culture-specific stimuli? Because it's an example, right?
That is an excellent point, and that's not the only reason. That's one of the reasons, right? To be able to elicit what is exactly what they have available. Yeah, and I have hammocks hanging in the stimulus in the picture that I have added as well, and hammocks being made of, right, when they are making the hammocks. And that's one of the reasons, but it's important to have culture-specific stimuli to be able to portray whatever they use on a daily basis, right? If we want to capture whatever is more entrenched, frequency matters, right? Whatever they see around and they elaborate around, they talk about on a daily basis is important as opposed to strange things. But having foreign themes, it's also important because you will see how they use whatever they have available to be able to talk about new themes as well.
All right, let me see if we have questions real quick. Oh my God. Let me see.
Can I stop presenting now?
Yes, you can. That's fine.
Yes. So it seems like there are no questions in this chat as far as I see.
We ran out of time, right?
I guess so.
All right. So Professor Claudete and Andre, can we stop right now? I think the professor, she has a meeting. Let me see. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, why people are they're asking if people have questions. Is that just why people are writing questions, or I don't know. I just heard here is only because you're not seeing what people are writing, right? But they're like giving compliments to your presentation and to your research because it's really, really wow, very, very important, right? And I was wondering about the basic locative construction in Cucama, because in Sequoia I got it, but in Cucama, can we say there are 3 basic constructions that they use?
In Cucama, there are 4. The first one was the juxtaposition of the figure and ground with the locative postposition. And then you have also stative verbs, adverbial-like stative verbs. And then you have
relational
nouns. And finally, you have also dispositional verbs, like the hammock is tied inside, the basket is sitting on, posture disposition verbs. So basically, most of what you can do with Sequoia, you can also do with Cucama, right? My point now is just to make sure that you notice that all these possibilities are out there in many languages, that maybe when we describe a language, we are simplifying facts if we just look at a usage. So from the perspective of a field worker, looking at corpus data and texts and stories and narratives is very important. Basing our descriptions on that type of data, corpus-based research is crucial for us, right? To capture what the speakers actually use. However, we may limit ourselves to only observe certain facts. And as I demonstrated with Cucama, is if I just look at narratives, probably the only description that would show up is perhaps the first one, the basic juxtaposition, and maybe one more. But once you start exploring this with more controlled stimuli, you will see that multiple possibilities emerge. And that is the most important fact for us when we are describing unknown languages, little known languages.
So I'd like to confirm really quick before the professor goes, please. If I understood correctly, you said one odd image was of the pot sitting upside down on branch of the tree. Right, there was an odd construction. And yeah, I think that's what I understood. And I thought it was very interesting also when you were expecting ecstatic construction, but the people saw that there was a person in the image like making the bread. So they said there's a woman making the bread, or the kids were laying on the ground. They were drawing or they were writing. Do you think you would have elicited different responses if there wasn't that little element, a little detail of maybe movement. If the kids weren't doing anything, maybe if the kids were sleeping, let's say, or if there wasn't the hand, what do you think? Do you think you could have different answers?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Let's see if let's touch on the last one first. Yes, I think in the design of this particular stimuli, since the language has so many strategies available to focus on details, right? One thing that I could try to do is make sure that whoever is represented as the figure is not doing much, is not doing anything, right? But even if you have the kids sleeping, let's say in the hammocks, probably they will say the kids are sleeping in the hammock, right? And I don't know if we could say that sleeping is now becoming a postural verb or something like that. That would be hard. But if they say the kids are hanging, lying down on the hammock, that's location. So there are possibilities of doing that, but for sure making it testing to what extent they see a dynamic event as opposed to a static location. That's something that we can test, right? That's very, very cool to try it out in future fieldwork sessions. And as for the pot, the ceramic pot, this is part of the experiment, the set designed by this lab in Holland. So they designed it this way. So they have a figure like a pot. They were trying to make stimuli neutral, culturally neutral, so that they can be elicited, used in different contexts. And they did use these sets of pictures around the world, in different regions of the world. And so in this case, this pot is presented on top of a track, on the floor, and the branch. So they move around the figure to elicit different types of configurations, right? And what I'm saying is, in this case, because it was placed in this new location for the community, they pay attention for the newness, that the impact of this pragmatically odd setting.
I see.
That I went directly to, yes, this is there, nicely located there, maybe because somebody was playing, oh my God, right? Instead of just playing simple locative elaboration was difficult to elicit with this pragmatically new context, because they would but that was part of the experiment, the set design.
I understand. Thank you very much.
So, no further questions? I don't think so. So, all right. Now I'm receiving the message. So, I'm gonna thank you again for being here, Professor. Thank you for the research. Thank you for the explanation and everything else. And that's it. We are gonna end our presentation, right? Our session, I'm so sorry. And I think, Professor Claudete, do you have some things to say? We will have another section, right? After this one, I'm gonna wait for it. But Professor, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And I hope to be in contact with you, or some of you at least, in the future.
You'll be perfect.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ok, eu acho que nós ainda estamos em transmissão para fazer um pequeno resumo de tudo que foi exposto aqui. A professora Rosa Vallejos, ela trabalha com 3 línguas, mas ela trouxe, no caso, 2, Cucama e Sequoia, né, para mostrar qual seria, de fato, a construção básica locativa nessas 2 línguas. No caso, o que foi exposto é que não existe uma única construção básica nas 2 línguas. No Cucama, ela Amanda vai me corrigindo aí se eu me atrapalhar. A Cucama, ela colocou que são 4, eu tinha visto 3, ela colocou são 4 construções, né? E na Sequoia são 4 também?
São.
Se eu não me engano,
Em ambos são 4. Ela comentou que existe globalmente parece que são 3, mas nas comunidades amazônicas tem o elemento adicional de pendurar por causa da cultura de ter redes, de pendurar redes. Então, existe esse locativo de pendurado sobre o chão, mas não em contato com o chão, certo?
Perfeito. E essa é uma razão pela qual, não a única, né, da importância de você ter estímulos específicos culturalmente, para que faça sentido para aquela comunidade, para que ela possa expor, né, e expressar o locativo. Né? E aí, eu acho que basicamente é isso. Eu esqueci de alguma coisa. Ah, tá, e só fechando. Tudo tem a ver com a maneira como aquelas pessoas perfilam aquele evento. O foco delas seria em relação à figura e o ground, ou se seria focado no aspecto, por exemplo, como foi o caso do avião, né? Não é sobre o avião estar sobre a água, é sobre o avião estar chegando ou saindo. E é isso. Complementos, Amanda?
E eu acho que é importante complementar que, sobre os estímulos que ela usou, os estímulos visuais, ela disse que usou um grupo de estímulos de Ameca e outros de 1999, então, que ela disse que são muito usados e tem até de graça na internet, mas que ela trouxe 20 estímulos suplementares que ela achou que seriam mais próximos da cultura daquele povo. E aí acontece que houveram não esperava, que foi o que ela chamou de imagens estranhas, entre aspas. Então, como, por exemplo, que foi a pergunta que eu fiz, eu perguntei sobre o pote que estava no ramo da árvore. Os falantes não deram uma resposta simples, como eu esperava, como o pote está na árvore, mas como era uma novidade para os falantes, eles atentaram muito para o novo. Então, foram elicitadas uma série de respostas complexas que não deram o resultado que ela estava esperando. Ou então, por exemplo, quando tinham crianças no chão, ela mostrou imagens com crianças no chão, e ela esperava uma resposta de as crianças estão no chão. Não foi dada essa resposta. Os falantes se atentaram para o caráter dinâmico da cena, porque as crianças estavam desenhando alguma coisa num papel. Então, todos os falantes falaram, as crianças estão desenhando, as crianças estão escrevendo. Então, ela disse que... Mas, percebendo isso, ela concluiu que existe espaço para os falantes fazerem construções diversas, e por isso aqui também, esse é um dos motivos que não existe uma construção básica. E aí ela disse também que a gente pode, inclusive, com isso, questionar o conceito de neutralidade, né, da neutralidade cultural do grupo de imagens que ela trouxe, que talvez essa neutralidade, ela é um pouco, ela não é totalmente neutra, porque depende muito da experiência dos falantes. Então, a neutralidade cultural é compatível com a neutralidade do uso? E aí ela também questionou o que é típico ou atípico no domínio de locativo. O que ela pensou que seria típico, talvez foi atípico, vice-versa. Surgiram construções atípicas, né, que ela não esperava, e eu acho que é isso. Mais alguma coisa, não é, Flávia, que você queira?
Eu acho que é isso. Não, só lembrando dos exemplos atípicos, como feijão no chão, que não pode acontecer, porque feijão é comida, então não pode estar no chão,
não pode estar no chão. E essa imagem do feijão no chão, por exemplo, era a imagem que era supostamente neutra culturalmente, né? Que nesse caso não era neutra culturalmente. Então fica essa discussão. E eu acho que é isso. Mas mais uma coisa importante, ela disse: os falantes, eles escolhem a construção baseando-se na parte da cena que eles querem destacar. Eu acho que isso é um pouco importante, porque traz um pouco a discussão de figura-fundo, né? De perspectiva.
Sim.
Mas, e essa discussão, acho que permeou um pouco a fala dela, a discussão do que está sendo colocado à luz, que ele está sendo um pouco deixado no pano de fundo. Basicamente, acho que é isso. Alguma pergunta no chat?
Eu acho que é isso. No chat, só tem que lembrar, gente, assinem a frequência, está no chat. E nós vamos encerrar essa transmissão. Daqui a pouquinho a gente vai ter outra. Eu tô toda louca no horário, não é? Vai ser o quê? 3h30, né? Assim?
Sim.
Perfeito. E é isso. Um abraço e até logo a todos.
Obrigada. Até mais.